Sound fine? Yes? Okay. The mic is for our live stream. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Malik. I'm Assistant Professor of Global Studies and the Director and Chair of Iranian and Persian Gulf Studies here at Oklahoma State University. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's IPGS Lecture Series event. As some of you may know, the School of Global Studies offers 4 IPGS endowed professorships with the purpose of developing focused educational and research efforts in and about the Iranian and Persian Gulf region. This annual support for the professorships allows faculty to explore their disciplines, whether in the liberal arts, engineering, agriculture, or otherwise, from the perspective of Iran and the Persian Gulf. And these open professorships are filled through a competitive call for proposals. We just completed our most recent round over the summer, and I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Adel Pezeshki, who is the most recent recipient of our IPGS endowed professorship. Dr. Pezeshki is Animal Science Graduates of Distinction and IPGS Endowed Professor at Oklahoma State University. He obtained his PhD in Veterinary Sciences from Ghent University Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in 2010. In 2011, he started a postdoctoral training in the Gastrointestinal Research Group at Calvin Phoebe and Joan Snyder Institute for Chronic Diseases and the Department of Production Animal Health at University of Calgary, Faculty of Medicine and Veterinary Medicine. In 2016, he joined the faculty as an assistant professor in the Department of Animal and Food Sciences here at OSU, and in July of 2022, he was promoted to associate professor with tenure. Woohoo! Dr. Pezeshki teaches undergraduate and graduate courses, and his current research interest is understanding how branched-chain amino acids and food-derived bioactive peptides regulate glycemic control. That's the most scientific sentence I've ever said. Adel is a member of several professional societies, including American Society for Nutrition, and serves as an associate editor on the editorial board of Gut Endocrinology for Frontiers in Endocrinology, and he's also on the reviewer board of Nutrients. Today, he'll be speaking to us about his research in a talk titled Diet and Metabolic Health, a Focus on the Persian Gulf Region. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pezeshki.
Thank you so much, Amy, for the kind introduction, and it's a true honor for me to talk about my work today as part of IPGS lecture series. And it's also great to see so many friends and colleagues here. This is just late Thursday afternoon. With no further ado, I'd like to dive into my talk about diet and metabolic health, which is mainly focused on the Persian Gulf region. Before starting the main discussion, I'd like to define what metabolic syndrome is. Metabolic syndrome generally is defined as the presence of one of these conditions, having, for example, too much triglycerides in the blood circulation. For example, having 150 milligram per deciliter of triglycerides in the blood. Having low level of a good fat like HDL, high density lipoprotein, and visceral obesity, or having too much fat in the abdominal area, or having glucose higher than 100 milligram per deciliter in the blood circulation, as well as hypertension, like having too much blood pressure. Before we start the discussion on the Persian Gulf area and the situation of the diseases in that area. So let's look at the situation that we are in the United States. So when we are talking about metabolic syndrome in the United States, you see the middle map. You see that the major problems are in the west, north, central, and also in west, south, central. And those numbers, they're showing the rate of metabolic syndrome like 35 to 40% in those areas. While if you look at the Pacific area or New England areas, so you don't see much of a problem in those areas. So kind of the same pattern in obesity. For the obesity, we see the same issues in the Midwest and West, North, Central, while the mountain areas in Pacific and New Englands, they have less issues in terms of obesity. For diabetes, we have a better situation here in Oklahoma, but again, we have some states that are showing more than 8% rate of diabetes in the United States. So looking at individual problems like obesity in the United States, so if you look back in 1985, so this is also showing the Canadian states situation for the obesity. So you can see most of the states in the United States showing less than 10% rate of obesity. And there are some like blue states showing like 10 to 14 or 15% rate of obesity. In less than 10 years, in 1994, we see that how it's growing, and the rate of obesity is going from 10% to close to 20% for most of the states. Again, another 10 years, so we don't see blue spots anymore. We see that all the states are kind of like showing the rate of higher than 15 to 20% in the United States. So, and this is the most recent one in 2022. The data is coming from CDC. As you can see, most of the states, we don't have any state with lower than 20% obesity rate in the United States. So, and sadly, if you look at Oklahoma, Louisiana, and West Virginia, those three states are showing the highest rate of obesity in the whole nation. The rates are like 45 to 50%. So it's very hard to see here, but it's just kind of like dark, like brown in those states. So obesity is a big problem. It's growing, not only in the United States, the whole world. That's a global issue. And this is a problem also related with insulin resistance and diabetes as well. So because of obesity is related with lots of metabolic issues as well. So let's look at the situation of this disease in Middle East and North African countries. So this shows the situation of metabolic syndrome and metabolic diseases in general in countries in the region. For example, for Iran, if you look at for 20 years data, so overweight and obesity, fortunately, has not been a big issue. But if you look at hypertension, is growing like from 1990s to 2010, like in 20 years, is almost 4 times higher. So it's a big, growth in the rate of hypertension, diabetes, and hypercholesterolemia. But that doesn't mean that the other countries are the same. Like if you look at Jordan and Kuwait, they have bigger problems with obesity. As you can see, obesity is growing in these countries. In Jordan, for example, overweight situation is growing from 44% to 68%. And the rest of the list is pretty much the same. So this is a problem. And we always know that like this Middle East and North African countries are known for undernutrition. They are developing countries. But the reality is we see lots of metabolic diseases development in those areas. So that's a warning situation in these countries. So looking at different countries again for obesity specifically, so if you look in almost all the countries in that region, they are showing the ascending pattern for the obesity in 2004 to 2008. For example, in Iran, you see that this is going up and is mainly in females than males. So the ratio of obesity, the rate of obesity is higher in females than males in Iran. For diabetes, again, in the same area, this is kind of showing the data from 2003 to 2030. It's just kind of expectation where that's going to be in the future. So there's no single country, if you look in here, showing a descending or decreasing rate of diabetes in the region. And so that will still grow in the future. So looking at more specifically for the Iran, different regions. So here in the middle column, you see the female, the rate of metabolic syndrome in females. On the right side, you see in the males. And in different regions. So one of the obvious things that you will see in these two maps, on the middle one and the right one, you see there are a lot more red areas in the middle one, which shows a higher rate of metabolic syndrome in females than males. And also you see the differences in different states. And the other factor that I notice here is the urbanization. So you see a lot more problems in the urban areas than rural. So that shows that change in lifestyle might have an impact in developing metabolic syndrome. Looking at obesity problem, the left one shows the female subjects, the middle ones, the male subjects. On the left side, as you can see, the females in urban area, they are a lot more prone to obesity, and they're showing more signs of obesity. And again, we do see those regional differences. So when you look at individual provinces in Iran, you see that in this part, north part, Mazandaran, has the highest rate of obesity in the whole country. And Hormozgan in the south has the lowest rate of obesity. So there are differences in different states. So the same kind of pattern for diabetes in Iran. So from the left to right, you see how diabetes is developing from 1990s. All the provinces are blue. As you're going to 2015, you see more red areas. That means that the diabetes is growing. Again, the rate is a lot more in females than male in Iran. On the right side, you see these two maps. This shows the mortality rate or the deaths due to diabetes. And as you can see, the death rate or mortality rate in females is a lot higher than males. So there's obviously a clear gender effect in the whole area. So that's, especially in Iran, we see that's obviously there. So the question that pops into mind, so why this is happening? What's the reason for this problem? So to answer that question, we should think about our environment. Okay, so we are living in a very obesogenic environment. And the problem is we still have the genes from our ancestors that are basically storing fat. So those kind of genes were really useful in the past because our ancestors may not had food all the time, so they had starvations. So those genes were really useful for them. So for us, those genes, they are working against us because our lifestyle is changing. So we are going through the sedentary lifestyle, and the type of food is also changing. Those are two big factors. So what is positive energy balance? Let's look at that one. So energy balance in general has two arms. One side is energy intake. The other side is energy expenditure. So what is energy expenditure? So basically physical activity. So if you are physically more active, you will burn more energy, so you will have a higher energy expenditure. Thermic effect of food is basically when you eat, you will feel that your body temperature goes up, right? That's the thermic effect of food. And basal metabolic rate, that's something in our genetics and cell metabolism that can change the energy expenditure significantly. As you can see, the major part of energy expenditure is basal metabolism. On the left side, we do have the energy intake, which is coming mainly from three different sources: protein, carbs, and fats. So as far as you have these two arms balanced, so you'll never experience overweight or obesity condition. So what is positive energy balance? This is positive energy balance. So when energy intake side is heavier than energy expenditure, that means that we are consuming food more than the physical activity, for example, okay? Or it can be both at the same time, right? At the same time that we are inactive, so we are eating more. So basically, our input is more than our output. So that's positive energy balance. And this will cause overweight and obesity. So what are the solutions for obesity? Actually, when I was a postdoc, I worked a little bit on the surgery side for the treatment of obesity. So there are basically three different ways to treat obesity. One is a surgery, which is the most actually effective way to treat obesity, but at the same time is invasive. So there are complications with surgery. So we have bariatric surgeries like Roux-en-Y, I'm sure you have heard, gastric bypass, those surgeries. So we did on animal models, but there are problems with that. Pharmacotherapy or using medications for treating obesity, again, any medications they use, there are side effects for that. And the part that I'm mainly focused on, my research is focused on, is on lifestyle modification, which is mainly on the diet and physical activity. So again, I'm not really much focused on the physical activity side, unfortunately. It's a completely different area. It's just a kinesiology, exercise physiology. So we are mainly focused on diet and how we can change diet to help with the metabolic syndrome. So this is diet and lifestyle changes is the chronic and natural way of basically controlling obesity and metabolic syndrome. All right, so as you know, it's a common sense that if you restrict your calories, if you eat less, you will lose weight. Okay, that's a common sense. But the problem with that approach is you cannot maintain it for a long time. So you got to use different things to just maintain the weight loss, okay? So there's been a lot of focus on 3 different macronutrients that we are getting from the diet. Those include carbs, proteins, and fats. So in few decades, the last few decades, there has been a lot of focus on carbs and fats. I'm sure you have heard about keto diets, that they're really high in fat and low in carbs. But today, I like to focus more on the protein. That's where our research is. So about protein, I'm sure, again, you have heard a lot of positive things about high consumption of the protein. So lots of people are doing exercise. They do get a lot of protein through the supplements. But the reality is we are living in an obesogenic environment. In the United States, 2 out of 3 people are overweight or obese. So suggesting something like a high dietary protein intake for the United States could be very bad, because lots of research is there showing that high protein intake is related with the risk of diabetes. So there are many research showing that. So the same thing in childhood, for children, for babies. If there is too much protein consumption, that is related with outcome. I mean, it's related with long-term outcome, like developing diabetes and obesity as they get older. So as you can see, this graph shows the babies are getting, like, they're nourishing breastfed, or they're getting high protein diets and low protein diets. So as you can see, the group is getting high protein diets through the formula in childhood. They have a higher BMI, or body mass index, 72 months after birth. So why this is happening? Because protein, when you eat too much protein, that stimulates insulin in your body. Protein, consumption of too much protein will secrete insulin. What is the role of insulin? Insulin is one of the hormones that can put too much fat in the cell, okay? So can increase the adipogenicity and weight gain, and can cause obesity and non-communicable diseases. So there are other studies showing that higher protein consumption is related with the risk of obesity. For the exact same reason, World Health Organization, in 2007, they suggested to use 8 to 25% lower protein intake than what they advised in 1985. So they knew that high protein consumption is causing problem. They said, okay, now in baby formulas, add less protein. Don't bump it with too much protein. That's going to cause issues. So we asked a question, so our research group, and so how about low protein diets? If the high protein diet is causing issues, so why not to give low protein diets? So that was a subject of kind of like part of my research when I did in Canada. So here, for this experiment, we use obesity-prone rats. So they are genetically prone to obesity. We made them fat, obesity model, and then assign them to 4 different groups with different amount of protein. So the first group had 15% protein, normal level of the protein. The second, 10%, third, 5%, and the last one, 0% protein. So we put all the rats in here. That's called CLAMS, or Computerized Lab Animal Monitoring System. So basically what it does, it measures the food intake and energy expenditure, how much energy they are utilizing, or how much they're getting and how much they're burning. So that's what it's measuring. At the same time, we measured their body composition using body composition analyzer. And also, we did glucose tolerance tests. It's similar to what we do in humans, right? So you give a shot of glucose, and then in certain intervals, you measure the blood glucose level to see how glucose is cleared from the blood, how effectively it's cleared. So sorry for this complicated slide. I just want to pick a few important points. So this is the data from that study. So if you look at the left side, shows actually the food intake in different groups. So if you pay closer attention to these 2 groups, like 10% and 5% protein groups, which are low protein groups, they are eating more than control group. So their consumption was higher. Only the group that dropped the actually food intake was 0% protein. So when a situation like this happens, if animals are eating more, or when we are eating more, the expectation is they're going to gain more, right? So when they're eating more, so they have to gain. So if you look at their body weight, so their body weight did not change. So it was very interesting to explain this data through the energy expenditure. So so these groups, the low protein groups, showed higher actually energy expenditure. So they burned more. So they had a higher metabolism. So this is one of the important metabolic benefits of low protein diets, right? So when you're actually burning more, right, so then you will not gain weight. So that was an explanation for that. So the other thing that we noticed that none of these 5% and 10% groups, they lost their body lean. Lean is a muscle, and their body fat. Only group that lost it, it was just a 0% group. And RQ is the respiratory quotient that we get it from that machine. It tells us, okay, what storage of the body is getting utilized. If this number gets 1, that means that they are burning more carbohydrate in their body. So this group, 5% group, was burning more carb. We also looked at some hormones in the blood. Some of the important ones that we picked, for example, insulin. Insulin level was really low in 0% protein. And at the same time, if you look at the glucose level, it was also low in that group. So that means that this 0% protein group is working very effectively. Not only is decreasing the insulin concentration, but also is lowering the glucose level. So there are some other hormones we picked, like FGF21, amylin. So FGF21 is a good hormone. It shows that there is a higher metabolism of glucose and lipid, and it was higher in low protein group. So this was another health benefits for the low protein group. Okay, so the early part that I showed you, it was the type of diet that we used there. It was low protein, high carbohydrate diet. So the argument that we had in the lab, how do we know the effects that we are seeing is not because I'm having too much carbohydrates. So Rizaldi Zapata was a PhD student at the time in our lab. Now he's a postdoc in University of Tennessee. He did this experiment with, again, low protein diets, but this time with high fat content, right? So the first experiment was low protein, high carb. This was one low protein, high fat. So he assigned the rats to 4 different groups. Normal group with the reduced protein 10%, 5%, and 1% group. We did the same measurements. We analyzed the body composition, did the glucose tolerance. And I want to show you how the clamps really works, just very briefly. So this is, sorry, that's very loud. So it is basically, there is a scale here, and the feeder is sitting on a scale. So as soon as they touch the food and they eat food, that measures how much actually their food consumption is. So this is a very accurate way of measuring food intake. So the sensitivity of this scale is 0.00 gram. So it can really measure accurately. And the lines that you see, they are measuring the oxygen and CO2 in the tank. So that will tell us something about their actually heat production and the energy expenditure. And this guy didn't seem to be very happy that I was recording that. So he was very depressed at that side. So anyway, so looking at the data, so we found very similar pattern in this group of experiments. So again, we saw that low protein groups are increasing their intake. But this time, very interestingly, we found that these groups, again, low protein groups, they're dropping their weight. So which is exactly what we want. So at the same time that you're eating a certain food, like higher amount, but you're dropping weight. Why? That's just because of having too much energy expenditure. So they were burning more. So that was actually the outcome of providing low protein diets. So again, we didn't see much on the changes in the body fat content. Only 1% protein dropped the body fat, and the same thing for a lean mass. Looked at some of the some of the hormones. Again, we found some of the good markers. They are decreasing. For example, the blood glucose level was lower in 1% protein. And the other hormones like GIP, this is one of the hormones that's secreted from the gut and affects the pancreas to secrete more insulin. So that was lower, which is good. So showing that having lesser amount of insulin stimulation, you can have a better clearance of the glucose. So FGF21, again, our good hormone, was higher in low-protein diets. So when I joined OSU, and I want to just follow up the same line of research, I was so much interested in the low-protein idea. I thought, okay, let me try this in pigs now and see if I can replicate the data, because we had more access to pig facility, swine facility. And this is a facility that we still use. So as you can see, there are metabolic chambers there. So I have 6 chambers there. So they're doing basically exact the same thing that I showed you in rats. So Shelby Spring was a graduate student in our lab. She did this experiment, assigned the young pigs to 3 groups: control, normal protein, 18% protein, and 12% protein. So coming back to data, we are seeing that the 12% protein dropped the food intake, not much with the 18% protein. You can see the same pattern on a weekly basis. Body weight, only 12% group dropped the body weight, but not much with 18%. But very interestingly, we saw the same pattern in energy expenditure. As if you remember, if you go back to the rat work, we showed that energy expenditure was higher. So if you look, again, with the 12% crude protein, so we see that increase energy expenditure transiently in a very short period of time, at least for week 1. The same pattern is there too. So showing that really low protein diets increases the energy expenditure, energy burning. So I hope I was trying just to convince you that low protein diets, they have metabolic benefits, okay, unlike high protein diets. So not only our group, there are a few other groups have shown the same results. So they have shown that low protein diets dropping the weight, improving the glucose homeostasis, and weight gain. And through in human models and mice, it's been shown. So we asked the question, what is in there? So what is in low protein diet that is causing this? So why actually we see this improvement when you're reducing the dietary protein content? So just a little bit background on the basis of the proteins. So amino acids are the subunits of the proteins. So there are 20 common amino acids in proteins, and 9 of them are essential amino acids. That means that they have to be received through the diet. So none of these 9 essential amino acids, they are made in the body. So they have to be consumed. The remaining 11, they are actually made in the body, and they are called non-essential. So the reason that I'm bringing this in, because when you're dropping the protein, so the subunits of protein also going down. So you're decreasing the amino acid concentration. So there are discussions on insulinogenic amino acids. Unfortunately, some of these amino acids, they have detrimental effects in long term because they can actually increase the insulin secretion. They're called insulinogenic amino acids and can actually contribute to the diabetes. So here we decided to drop actually the amount of the insulinogenic amino acids and see what is the effect of actually reducing the consumption of these amino acids on animals. So Matt Gordon, who's here in attendance, he did actually this experiment. Assigned the pigs to 3 different groups, no restriction, no just control group. The second group was R50 or 50% lower amino acids, and the third group with 75% restricted amino acids. So he designed actually this feeder system. As you can see, the bottles, these are the milk bottles. They are sitting on the hot plates, and that keeps the temperature of the milk all the time at constant range. So they're getting fresh milk all the time. And this is how they look like. So when they're drinking milk, and as soon as they touch this nozzle, so the milk flows to this cup basically, and they drink. So we had some spillage. It's not as good as the clamps, but that still worked out. And then as part of this experiment, we did oral glucose tolerance test, and we collected their tissues at the end of the experiment to do some analysis. So very interestingly, when we look at the data, we found that with reducing the amount of amino acid, this type of amino acid, there are 8 of them. So we reduce, sorry, I forgot to mention, there are 8 amino acids that are insulinogenic. So when we reduce them, so the amount of the glucose in the blood goes down. So that showed really positive effects, on not only in the glucose, also in insulin half-life was decreased, which were a positive effect. So we looked at different tissues, including liver. We looked at the gene expression. We picked some markers that are related with glucose metabolism. On the left side, you see 2 markers like PFK and PKLR that they are involved in glucose oxidation and glucose metabolism. So you can see that restriction reducing the amino acids consumption is increasing this amino acids, this genes expression. Basically tells me that they have a higher metabolism of the glucose. These 2 markers, AKT and IRS1, those are the markers for insulin signaling. Basically tells me how effectively insulin is working in the tissue. And they had a higher expression of these markers. And that was another positive response from restriction of BCAA, insulinogenic amino acids. And finally, these 2 are showing that there is a high intake of the glucose to the tissues, and also higher oxidation and metabolism of the glucose. So since we basically just reduced only 8 of these amino acids, we were not sure which one is actually playing a role, because we had 8 amino acids there. So we asked the question, which of those amino acids they are mediating the effect of low insulinogenic amino acids diet and glycemic control. So we focused on these 3 amino acids among those 8. These are called branched chain amino acids. They include leucine, isoleucine, and valine. I'll get into a second why we picked on these 3. I'm sure all of you have seen this kind of supplements in the grocery stores, BCAA supplements. So they are mainly used by bodybuilders, right, to get more protein, to gain more protein, make more muscle, basically. So the role of this amino acid is making protein in the muscle. So, and also they can protect, basically, the muscle breakdown. So that's why lots of bodybuilding guys, they're using this kind of supplements. So in a typical Western diet, the amount of the BCAA in the diet is almost 20% of the protein intake. So 20% of what you get is coming from the branched chain amino acids. Okay, why we picked on these 3? Because our studies in pigs and rats showed some markers that the metabolism of these amino acids are changing. So on the left side, you see that these 3 amino acids, degradation and biosynthesis is changing after metabolomic analysis. On the right side, you see the gene expression of 2 enzymes that are breaking down BCAA, or branched chain amino acid, and they're going high. So the other reason that we picked on branched chain amino acids, they are considered as markers of diabetes in the previous literature. They're saying that this BCAA, if you see the yellow columns, that shows actually the relationship of branched chain amino acids in the diet with obesity and insulin resistance. So it's been shown that in humans, in rats, and mice, having too much BCAA, or branched chain amino acids, in the blood, so that may be related with insulin resistance and obesity. So this one also shows the relationship of having too much leucine in the blood and insulin resistance, and through the markers that we call A1C. A1C in diabetes is one of the indexes. So having higher A1C means higher rate of or having basically signs of a diabetes. So currently, our next project that's undergoing right now, Matthew is just working in a cell culture model. So we are using, instead of animals, we are using cells, cell lines, using on the liver cell line, and under like high glucose condition and low glucose condition, mimicking actually the diabetes situation, trying to restrict these amino acids and see what happens in terms of the glucose uptake or glucose metabolism in the liver. So hopefully by end of December, we'll have some data on that. So that made me wonder, okay, what are the dietary sources of BCAA? Okay, where, like in the natural, what are the natural sources of BCAA? So I tried to explain that BCAA are not good for you, okay? So they are bad. That's my interpretation so far. So if you look at the animal protein sources, you will find out that BCAA, or this amino acid, they are really high in animal proteins, like chicken, beef, pork, salmon, egg, whole milk, dairy products. On the other side, if you look at plant sources, so the proteins are coming from plants, they have a lower concentration of BCAA. There are some exceptions. For example, brown rice or black beans, mushrooms, they have higher levels of the BCAA as closer to the animal sources. So keeping that in mind, that BCAA are kind of like bad amino acids, and in terms of developing metabolic syndrome, okay? And also we know that in the Middle Eastern areas, in the regions, we consume too much cereals, right? Proteins are coming from the plant sources. So my assumption was that, okay, probably we are consuming less amount of BCAA. Maybe that's why Mediterranean diet is considered a good diet. So try to look at that one. So this part is completely new for me. I'm not a clinical nutritionist, but I looked at this maps to see what's the situation. So the best way to look at this data is to look at the WHO way of dividing the world to 6 different regions. Iran and different countries, they are located in this green part. So that's called Eastern Mediterranean region. So that's one of the 6 areas that WHO is dividing based on the dietary needs. So if you look at closely this part, this green part that's shown with bigger magnification there. So basically Eastern Mediterranean region. So this part is including like 22 countries, including Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Egypt, Sudan. And they are basically making 9% of the world population. I think there are like 650 million people living in that region, so in that 22 countries. So those out of 22 countries in that region, 7 of them, they have made actually food-based dietary requirements, and this is their logos. For example, you can see in Qatar or in different countries, in Lebanon, for example. And the blue one here shows actually the dietary requirements for the Irans, which is very much focused on the use of the cereal grains. So on the low level, you see the cereal grains. On the middle layer, you see the fruits and vegetables, and then the meat and dairy products. And on top, you see the sugars and miscellaneous kind of foods like sugars and fats. So basically, I would say the diet that people are consuming in this area, the traditional food, can be considered as Mediterranean diet, okay? So what is a Mediterranean diet? I'm sure you have heard about that there are lots of good things about Mediterranean diet. The whole discussion started in Greece and Italy in 1950s and 1960s. The reason that they looked at Mediterranean diet is just because scientists found that people in those areas, in Greece and parts of Italy, they have less morbidity and mortality due to metabolic disorders. So what they found when they look at their diet, they found that they are consuming a huge amount of cereal grains. So the numbers of cereal grains was pretty high. The other things that was notable in there that was high, like vegetable oils, pulses, and fruits, and olive oil was one of the major components in Mediterranean diet. So this graphs basically show the same pattern. If you look, the consumption of the cereal grains in the Mediterranean area, in Mediterranean countries, that's a lot higher than the Northern Europe countries. Again, the consumption of the fruits is high, vegetable oil is very high, and also olive oil was relatively high in this Mediterranean diet. So looking at different countries in Mediterranean area, so for example in Turkey and countries that in that region that are like in terms of dietary habits that were similar to Iran, you can see that cereal grain consumption is very high, and wheat also is high. The consumption of wheat is higher than the other countries. North Africa is kind of like similar. And then you see that the consumption of the sweetener is very low, and vegetables, fruits, vegetable oils consumption is high. So these are the typical examples of Mediterranean diet. So West Mediterranean diet is like something similar to what you see in Italy and Greece, which is slightly different than what we have in that region. So just to summarize this part, what is good about Mediterranean diet? So why people are always talking about Mediterranean diet? So there are several hypotheses that Mediterranean diets are good. So they are all listed here. For example, reduced calorie intake or increased phytochemicals. They are molecules that are good for the health in a diet and so forth. But the part that I'm really interested in Mediterranean diet, and I just learned actually, is that there is a reduced amino acid consumption in Mediterranean diet. So when I look at that part, I found out that compared to Western diet, so the amount of protein consumption in the Mediterranean diet is 20% less. So lower protein consumption in this type of food. So not only the amount of the protein, but also the quality of the protein is very different. So when we looked at the level of the branched-chain amino acid and methionine in this type of food, it was 30% lower in Mediterranean diet compared to Western food. So Western diet is known for using kind of like more processed food and refined foods. But in this type, Mediterranean one is just a lot more focused on the cereal grains and fruits, vegetables, and also meat, but not much on the processed and refined meat. So now we know that, okay, so the Mediterranean diet is good, and that's a traditional food in the region. So the question is, why do we see this problem? Why we have the metabolic syndrome in the areas growing? So that was just kind of like controversial to me. So to answer this question, I looked at, again, other papers and see the kind of like same pattern that you, like any like paper that you pick for any part of the world that they are doing nutrition transition pattern, they are saying that they're talking about industrialization of the diet or westernization of the diet, basically. And so since we are getting busy every day, right, we are in sedentary lifestyle. So basically, we are using more processed foods, okay, which is related with more inflammation, and inflammation is related with developing obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular issues. So, and this is a global issue. It's not really limited to Mediterranean area. So the concern is, so in probably next 40, 50 years, we may not see this type of food, right? Is we are slowly moving away from that to more processed foods in this in the region. So I'm sure if you're on this Instagram, following any restaurants in big cities, you see lots of advertisements about snacks or fast foods, and this is the reality. So I mean, we're slowly losing our traditional diet. So we are moving to more consumption of the branched-chain amino acids. And for me, I just wanted to check that. I asked from my 4-year-old son this morning. I said, okay, which one you like, the left or right? I was hoping that he would say, okay, the left one. And he said, none of them. So just, and I was happy that he didn't pick this one at least. So, but that's the reality. And this slide shows actually the data from 47 years. So how actually the food consumption pattern is changing. For example, in Middle East, you see that the energy from cereals, the energy consumption from cereals is decreasing. The same thing in North Africa. The energy from the fruits is decreasing, is going down. Not much change in vegetables, but in the meat consumption goes up in both regions. The energy from the milk has not changed much. And vegetable oil, that's another point of concern because we know that vegetable oils are used a lot in snacks and fast foods, and that can cause lots of issues. So the reason that the consumption is really high for vegetable oil is because they are cheaper. So they are used a lot, like lots of restaurants use this kind of oil. So now we know that the problem is not in the region, like in the East, in the Middle East, is not really undernutrition. We still have the problem, like iron deficiency, vitamin deficiency is still going on, but we have a bigger problem developing of the metabolic syndrome. And to be honest, I didn't find any single paper that is focused on branched-chain amino acid consumption and developing obesity in that region, in any countries in that region. So there are some papers here in the United States, North America, but nothing really in that region. So just to wrap up my discussion with a few conclusions. So we talked about the importance of the Mediterranean diet because of its health benefits. It has 20% less protein. It has 30% less intake of branched-chain amino acid and essential amino acids. But the problem is the food is getting more industrialized, and and this is a global issue, not the only problem with that region. So that is changing the dietary habit and traditional foods. So we will lose our traditional foods over time. And unfortunately, that's a problem, and that's a problem that's relating with metabolic diseases development in that region. So how we can develop plans for preventing that issue? Education, I believe, is very important. Education of the people on the importance of the healthy diet. And also policies that governments that can apply for the availability of the healthy foods. So if you go to this obesity meeting here in the state, you find really big sessions that they are talking about the policies, right? Nothing about really science. It's just the policies, how we can apply certain policies to discourage people of not eating really unhealthy food. And further basic and clinical nutrition research, that's the part that we are doing and my colleagues. So I think that's very important for advancing our knowledge to understand the problems better. So with that, I like to thank the people who were involved in my research over the years and the graduate students in my lab, the animal and food science faculty and staff, undergrad scholars who worked with us over the years, and my collaborators at OSU and outside of OSU, and the funding sources that are funding our research. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Okay, not bad.
We have a live stream, so I wanted to ask if you have any questions, you can use the mic even though it's not amplifying in the room. Does anyone have any questions?
I will ask from the speaker. Thank you, Dr. Pezeshki, for very nice presentation, very informative. For the animals you tested, the pigs and the rats, they were imprisoned for 4 weeks inside of their cage? Because you started by saying diet and physical activity. So I was wondering if they are kind of having coupling effect on the metabolism. So you studied the diet, but they were imprisoned for 4 weeks, right?
Well, yeah, they were individually housed. The reason that we are doing that is if they are group housed, so we can't really measure their intake, their food intake. So that if you want to measure the accurately food intake, you got to go with individual food intake consumption. So So we call it individual housing, and that's totally fine.
And then what happens to them after 4 weeks?
After 4 weeks, and it depends on the experiments. Okay, we did so many experiments. Some of them, they go to other different experiments, or we terminate the experiments. Depends on the goals. So we may collect the tissues from them. So we have the protocols like for humane way of euthanizing animals, and we just collect the different tissues like liver, muscle, and then just look at different markers. Good questions. Yeah, sure.
Can I follow up on that? So is there like a wheel or something in there? Like, is there something for them to get physical? Because you mentioned in some of the data you could see a reduction or an increase in their physical activity, right?
Right. It was not a physical activity. So there are ways to like look at the physical activities, like using treadmills, right? For mice and rats. So we have the same tools, so you can let them run. You can measure how much energy they're using. But this was just the energy that they are utilizing from their own body. Like, so we have the basal metabolism. Even we sit here, do nothing, our body is generating heat, right? That's our basal metabolism. So we are basically measuring that, and also the amount of energy that they are releasing after consumption of food. So if you release more heat after food consumption, so that means that that might have an effect on the weight loss. Okay, so that's energy expenditure is different than actually the physical, actually measuring the physical activity. So, yes, please.
So thanks, Adel. So how are you, or are you trying to tease out, so with the transition to a more processed diet, so those diets have more branched chain amino acids, is what you stated, but then there's also everything else that goes with the processing effect of macronutrients, the additives, the preservatives. So how do you tease apart whether it's that piece versus the change in the protein?
Yeah. This is a very hard, good question, but it's very hard to answer, right? It's just, so that's the problem, and you know that we don't have any data. There is nothing really out there to tell me, okay, now if you're changing this, like processed food, let's say, the consumption of the BCAA is really going up. But that was my own personal interpretation from what's happening, because when I look at the sources of the BCAA, I say, okay, these are the sources, these are the protein sources that they have higher BCAA. These are slowly changing. But I couldn't find really research showing that in a more controlled way that that's happening. But that's a good point. This is just, I would say that's more hypothetical, and that needs to be proved. Good question, though.
Hello, Dr. Pezeshki. Nice to meet you, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I was wondering what kind of food you provided to the animals, because you know we have high glycemic food intakes,
Yes.
and also low glycemic. So
Yep.
depending on that, our glucose levels changes, right?
Yes.
So what kind of food did you?
Yeah, that's a good question. The type of food, so when we are making for rodents, that's coming from the individual ingredients. So we have, for example, casein, like is a protein, or corn. Different sort of like we have the protein sources, carbohydrate sources. So we are making our own food. So when you're talking about the glycemic index, that talks about, for example, if you like eat an apple, right? So that has certain glycemic index, right? That's different than what we were making, and because there we didn't really use the different types of food. We made our own food with individual ingredients, and also they were getting exact the same. Everything was consistent across groups. The only component that was changing was the protein. So other than that, everything was pretty consistent. Energy was consistent, carbohydrate or fat. So that could not be really confounding factor in the diets. So if I could answer that question that way.
Yeah, I was wondering this because, you know, I got a glucometer.
Yes, yep.
I was testing by myself,
Yep.
you know, every time I got any food, what was altering my system.
Yep.
So that's why I am asking this.
Okay. No, that's a great question. No, that's wonderful. Yeah. That's a very practical question that we always deal with, right? Yeah, good.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. So I have one general question. So you have studied, all those tests on the rats and then on the pigs. So I was wondering which one better, resemble, what's happening in the human body, rat or pig? So which one would be closer to what's happening in human?
Oh, that's a good question. So this is a very interesting question because there's lots of discussion. A lot of people are using rodents as a model for human problems. But if you look on the similarity of the pigs to many parameters that are related to humans, they have a lot more similarity. Let's say in their how they're regulating their metabolism, glucose metabolism, or their cardiovascular system. They have lots of similarities with humans. But working with rodents is a lot easier than large animals. So even weighing them, right, and getting like blood samples, everything is challenging when you work with large animals. But with smaller animals, it's always easier to handle. So I would say each of them, they have a pros and cons. So, but actually the pigs that we used, they were not really model of obesity. There was just a commercial pigs, so just regular pigs that we use. But there are pigs that are used as a model of obesity, like Asaba pigs. So they grow very fat. I mean, they gain a lot of fat. They are a great model of obesity. So I would say that those are one of the best models for this kind of issues. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if you want to, thank you. So if you want to do this test on human, I mean, is there any limitation doing that? Because I receive emails from Nutritional Science Department
Right.
that they're looking for human models to just
Right.
do their tests for a specific period of time, like maybe 2 years. So I mean, if you want to do this test on human models, I mean, is it safe or what constraints you
Sure.
have?
Actually, they have been done in humans, some of those tests. So yeah, so if you look at some of those, I didn't present everything, but there are papers in humans that they have tested low protein diets. So the way that they do for the clinical studies, they make it like as part of your actual, like, okay, just a regular diet. So you don't go like completely like a customized diet for you. So it's just a clinical study. It's not the basic research. It's just kind of changing certain aspects of that to test the hypothesis. But yeah, I mean, that can be easily done in humans, and it's been done in humans. So that's not a big concern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Of course, in humans, we can't drop the protein to 0, right? That would be a problem. So, but we did in the rats, right? In our animal experiments, so we dropped the protein to 0, and if you look at those animals, so they are losing tons of fat and muscle. Yeah, I mean, not muscle, but they lost a huge amount of weight.
Also no individual housing.
Right. So just one comment on that, it's just in terms of animal behavior. So when you're doing individual housing, you got to make sure that they can see each other, okay? So it's not like a cell that you put the animal there and so like rats and pigs, they're very social animals. And just what kind of, and if they don't like see each other, that may affect their behavior. So that's just it's very important to have that. Yeah, right. Yep.
So that's why you have a glass box.
Yes. Yeah. Right. I don't think we ever get approval for to just putting in a solid box, just a black solid box.
I have a question about some of the early slides that you showed with the data on obesity in Iran.
Yep.
And especially looking at the regional variation.
Right.
You mentioned that especially like Mazandaran seems to be where we had the highest rates of obesity in the whole country. Do you have any even speculative ideas about why that particular region might be experiencing that more than others?
Yeah. That's a good question. I also looked in those papers to see if they provide any explanation on that. See, okay, why that specific region is. I think they had a very general discussion on just the lifestyle or economical situation of families. I really don't have any data to show okay why that's different. But I would assume probably the way of living or the lifestyle. I don't know if just more sedentary life. I really don't know the answer for that. So
Maybe that's because of the carbs and rice.
yeah, but for me, female, there were some really good discussions like, hey, why females and males? So you see that females. So they were saying, okay, part of that is because of the post-menopausal effects. And so anyway, the population in Iran is aging, right? So we are going to different area. And we see those advancing in age is causing lots of hormonal issues in females. So we do see those changes in females and males. That's one of the reasons that we do see that effect. But again, there is no really solid explanation why we have those kind of effects.
Sorry, one more thing about that. You mentioned hypertension was one of the things that was really rising in Iran compared to other countries in the region, as opposed to, say, diabetes.
Right.
Again, it may be speculative, but nevertheless, do you have any insights about why that may be?
I would probably say using more like fast foods, because like one of the key aspects of hypertension is getting too much salt in the diet, right? I mean, it might be an explanation for that. Just changing in dietary habits could play a role.
Fast food.
Fast food, yeah, basically, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Final thoughts? All right. Thank
Okay.
you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Pezeshki.
Appreciate that. Thank you.